Imagine you're carrying 7 stones. You've held them so long, your arms forgot what it feels like to be empty. Each stone has a name. One is the toxic environment you won't leave. Another is the harmful pattern you keep repeating. There's the anger you're still nursing from 3 years ago. The compensation method you reach for every time discomfort appears. The ego you're constantly defending. The mental noise that never stops. And the rigid belief about how life should be. A Buddhist teacher once asked his students to hold stones while he taught. After an hour, their arms ached unbearably. He said, "The stones haven't gotten heavier. You've just been holding them too long." What if freedom isn't about becoming someone else? What if it's simply about releasing what was never yours to carry? Wherever you are right now, whether you can see moonlight or streetlights or only darkness, you're in the right place. If something feels heavy, you're not broken. You're just carrying stones you forgot you could put down. Tonight, we'll explore 7 ancient teachings, not about acquiring anything new, about releasing 7 types of burdens. The Buddha taught that we already have what we seek. It's just obscured, like sky behind clouds. When clouds pass, the sky was always there. The first burden people carry without realizing it is closer than you think. Your surroundings shape your inner state more than you realize. Not just the room you're sitting in right now, though that matters. The people you spend hours with every week. The content you consume before sleep. The conversations that fill your commute. The energy you walk into when you open your front door. All of it seeps in, quietly, constantly. Think of it like osmosis, that process where molecules pass through membranes without you noticing. Your environment isn't something separate from you that you observe from a distance. You're immersed in it, absorbing it, becoming it. The anxious person's anxiety becomes your baseline. The chaotic space's chaos becomes your normal. The angry content's anger becomes your lens. And because it happens slowly, you don't notice the shift until you're already swimming in completely different water than you intended. The Buddha said something direct about this. Association with the wise is wholesome. Association with fools is not. Sounds harsh until you translate it into modern terms. Who you spend time with becomes who you are. What you consume daily shapes what you think is normal. Where you place your body determines what your mind absorbs. This isn't moral judgment. It's practical observation, like saying water flows downhill or fire needs oxygen. You can't grow orchids in toxic soil, no matter how determined the orchid. You can't stay calm in chaos, no matter how much you meditate. Environment wins. Most people don't notice their environment is toxic until they've been breathing poison for years. It happens gradually, one compromise, one accommodation one "it's not that bad" at a time. Then one morning you wake up exhausted for no reason you can name, and you don't remember when breathing became this hard. There's an ancient story about someone who learned this the hardest way possible. His name was Sigala, and his father left him everything except the one thing that mattered. Sigala was 23 when his father died. The old merchant had built a modest fortune through decades of careful trading. Silk, spices, precious metals carried along routes from the Ganges to the western seas. He wasn't wealthy by royal standards, but comfortable enough that his son would never worry about food or shelter. On his deathbed, the father called Sigala close. His voice was weak, but the words came clear. "Choose your companions carefully. They're like the water you swim in. Good water makes you stronger. Poisoned water kills you so slowly, you don't notice until it's too late." Sigala nodded, held his father's hand, promised to remember. But grief has a way of making everything feel distant and unreal, and advice from the dying can sound like worry from another era. 3 months after the funeral, Sigala met them at the market. 5 young men his age, dressed well, laughing loud, moving through the stalls like they owned the streets. One of them, Devaka, saw Sigala standing alone and recognized something. Fresh inheritance, recent loss, that particular vulnerability of someone trying to figure out who they are now that their parents are gone. "You look like you could use a drink," Devaka said, grinning. "We're headed to Ananda's place. Best wine in the city, and the night's still young." Sigala hesitated, then thought, why not? His father had been cautious his whole life, and what had it gotten him? A modest house and an early death. Maybe it was time to actually live. That first night was intoxicating in ways that had nothing to do with wine. These men were confident, careless, magnetic. They told stories about narrow escapes and unlikely victories. They made plans that sounded ambitious and vague. Fortunes to be made, territories to explore, women to win, rivals to best. Everything felt possible in their company, and Sigala, who'd spent his whole life watching his father count coins and worry about weather, felt like he'd finally found his people. "You should host next time," Devaka said, as dawn broke and they stumbled into the street. "Your place is bigger than Ananda's, and you've got that courtyard. We could really make a night of it." Sigala agreed before he'd fully considered it. Anything to keep this feeling going, this sense of being alive, being seen, being part of something electric. The gatherings became regular, every few nights, sometimes more. Sigala's home transformed into something his father wouldn't recognize. Loud music echoing off stone walls, oil lamps burning until dawn, servants exhausted from endless demands for food and drink. His new friends praised his generosity, called him brother, promised they'd do the same for him someday. "You're young," they'd say, when he occasionally hesitated at the cost of another feast. live a little. Money can always be made. But these nights, these are the memories that matter. And it was thrilling, for a while. The way they looked at him with approval when he paid for another round. The way strangers knew his name now. Oh, you're Sigala, the one with the incredible parties. The way emptiness and grief got buried under noise and motion, and the constant presence of others. But mornings were different. Mornings meant waking to debris, broken furniture, wine stains on silk cushions, the house reeking of stale smoke and spilled food. Mornings meant headaches and a kind of exhaustion that sleep didn't fix. Mornings meant servants giving him looks he couldn't quite interpret. Pity, maybe, or disappointment, or just the tiredness of people who'd been up all night cleaning other people's messes. And mornings meant looking at the accounts his father had kept so carefully, watching the numbers shrink. Week by week, month by month, the inheritance bleeding out faster than he'd imagined possible. 6 months in, Sigala tried to slow down. Maybe we take a break this week, he suggested, when Devaka arrived at his door. I need to sort out some business matters. Devaka's face shifted, just slightly, just for a moment, before the grin returned. Business matters? Come on, that can wait. Ananda brought musicians from the north, and there's this woman. You have to see her dance. Don't turn boring on us now. The words stung more than they should have. Boring, like his father, cautious, worried, missing out on life's richness. So Sigala pushed his concerns aside and opened his door wider, let the noise flood back in, drowned his doubts in wine and company and the desperate need to not be left behind. A year passed, then another 6 months. The inheritance that was supposed to last a lifetime was nearly gone. Sigala's health had declined in ways he kept trying to ignore. Weight loss, persistent cough, sleep that never felt restful, no matter how many hours he managed. The house showed wear that no amount of cleaning could hide, cracks in the courtyard stones, furniture held together with rope, walls that needed repair he couldn't afford. His clothes hung loose on a frame that used to be solid. His hands shook slightly in the mornings before the first drink steadied them. He'd started avoiding mirrors because the face looking back belonged to someone older, hollower, more desperate than he remembered being. And his friends were always there, always suggesting one more gathering, one more gamble, one more investment in a venture that would definitely pay off this time, always reassuring him that things would turn around, that he just needed to relax, that his worry was what was really holding him back. Until the morning he woke to silence. Complete silence. No voices in the courtyard. No servants moving through rooms. No friends sleeping off the previous night's excess. Sigala walked through his house in growing confusion. The servants had left. He'd been unable to pay them for weeks, and they'd finally given up. The last of the valuable furnishings were gone, sold or stolen. He couldn't tell which anymore. And his friends, The brothers who'd promised they'd always be there had vanished like morning fog when the inheritance finally dried up completely. He stood in what used to be his father's room, now empty except for dust and morning light streaming through broken shutters. Broken furniture leaned against walls. Unpaid debt notices lay scattered on the floor. And in the crushing silence, his father's last words came back with the weight of prophecy. They're like the water you swim in. Sigala sat down in the debris of his life and wept. Not the easy tears of wine-soaked sentiment, but the deep, shaking grief of understanding exactly how he'd arrived here. Each choice suddenly visible in sequence. Every time he'd ignored discomfort, every warning he'd dismissed, every moment he'd chosen noise over silence, because silence meant feeling things he didn't want to feel. He'd thought he was choosing freedom. Turns out he'd been choosing a different kind of prison, one that looked like celebration, but functioned like slow drowning. That afternoon, walking through the city in clothes he hadn't washed in days, he encountered an elderly monk. The man looked familiar, one of his father's old friends, someone who used to visit when Sigala was a child. The monk saw him, stopped, studied his face with eyes that seemed to see everything. He didn't ask what happened. That was written clearly enough in Sigala's appearance. Instead, he asked something simpler. What water have you been swimming in? And Sigala saw it. Completely. All at once. His friends hadn't corrupted him. They'd simply been themselves. And he'd chosen to swim in their water. The environment hadn't been neutral. It had been poison. And he'd drunk it willingly, day after day, until poison felt normal and health felt foreign. The monk didn't lecture, didn't offer solutions or strategies or 10 steps to rebuild your life. Just waited while Sigala stood there, absorbing the full weight of his father's wisdom, now earned through experience instead of received as advice. I need different water, Sigala finally said. The monk nodded. Then find it. What happened next took years. Not because changing environment is complex, but because Sigala had to rebuild everything: work, home, health, reputation, the basic capacity to trust his own judgment. He moved to a smaller dwelling in a quieter part of the city, found work that required showing up daily, being reliable, earning trust slowly, started spending evenings with people who went to bed at reasonable hours, and woke up without regret, stopped going places that made him feel depleted by morning. It wasn't dramatic, no single moment of transformation, no sudden enlightenment, just the slow, patient work of changing the water he swam in, one choice at a time. And gradually, so gradually, he barely noticed until he looked back. Each day felt lighter than the last. Years later, someone asked him how he'd turned his life around. Sigala thought about it carefully before answering. It wasn't about willpower. It was about changing the water. Perhaps you've felt this. Spending time with certain people leaves you exhausted in ways that sleep doesn't fix. Scrolling certain content makes your chest tight and your thoughts race. Being in specific spaces, even your own home, makes you hold your breath without realizing it. The Buddha wasn't being judgmental when he talked about choosing associations carefully. He was being practical, like a doctor, warning you not to drink contaminated water. You can tell yourself the water is fine. You can develop high tolerance for poison. But tolerance doesn't mean health. It just means you've gotten used to being sick. This doesn't mean your people are bad or your spaces are wrong. It means paying attention to effects rather than intentions. That friend who's genuinely kind but always leaves you feeling drained, maybe limit that exposure. That news source that keeps you informed but also keeps you anxious, maybe consume it differently. That physical clutter that represents memories but also represents weight, maybe honor the memories differently. Your work environment might be professionally necessary but emotionally toxic. Notice that. Then ask what boundaries might help. Your family gatherings might be obligatory, but consistently depleting. Acknowledge that. Then consider what would make them more bearable. Your social media feeds might be entertaining but also agitating. See that clearly. Then decide if the trade is worth it. One thing. That's all. Just notice one element of your environment that depletes rather than nourishes. Not to judge it, not to wage war against it, just to see it clearly. Then ask, what if you changed just this one element? Not everything, not all at once, just this. What if you spent 15 minutes less with that person who leaves you feeling small? What if you replaced morning news with morning silence? What if you cleaned one corner of one room and noticed how your breathing changes in that space? What if you unsubscribed from that one source that always makes your stomach tighten? Changing environment sounds simple until you try it. Then you discover how much identity gets wrapped up in surroundings. How much fear lives in the gap between familiar poison and unfamiliar health. How voices will say, "Don't turn boring on us now," when you start choosing differently. But here's what the story of Sigala teaches. The water you swim in determines whether you thrive or slowly drown, and you get to choose the water. Not always easily, not always immediately, but you do get to choose. Notice your surroundings right now, not to judge them, just to see them clearly. The sounds around you, the quality of air, the energy that fills this space. Does it help you breathe deeper or make you hold your breath? Even the device you're listening on right now sits within an environment. Is this space where you're resting conducive to rest? Or are you trying to find peace in a setting that works against peace? This is the first burden to examine, because it's the most visible, the most changeable. Environment sits on the surface. You can see it, touch it, alter it directly. Once external space begins to clear, you can finally see what's happening internally. The patterns you've been repeating, the emotions you've been carrying, the stories you've been believing. But you can't see any of that clearly while swimming in poisoned water. First, you change the water, then everything else becomes possible. Environment is only the first burden. There's something more personal we carry, something that plays out regardless of surroundings, following us from space to space, like a shadow we can't shake. It's quieter than environment, but just as heavy, and most people don't notice they're carrying it until someone points it out directly. We're creatures of habit. Most of what you do each day happens without thinking. The route you walk, the words you say when someone upsets you, the way you react when plans fall apart. Patterns laid down years ago, still running quietly beneath awareness. Some of these patterns serve you well. Brushing teeth before bed prevents decay without requiring nightly negotiation with yourself about dental hygiene. Looking both ways before crossing streets keeps you alive without conscious effort. Saying thank you when someone helps you maintains relationships through automatic courtesy. These useful patterns are gifts from your past self to your present self. Good decisions made once that now run smoothly in the background, freeing up energy for things that actually need attention. But other patterns trap you, reaching for your phone the moment anxiety surfaces, speaking harshly to people you love when you feel hurt, eating until uncomfortably full when emotions become intense, avoiding difficult conversations until they become crises, saying yes when you mean no because disappointing others feels unbearable. These patterns formed for reasons, usually good ones at the time. The child who learned to stay quiet during parents' arguments developed a pattern. Conflict means danger. Silence means safety. That pattern protected them, but now they're 40, and that same pattern means they can't speak up when colleagues take credit for their work, can't ask for what they need in relationships, can't defend themselves when treated unfairly. The protection became a prison. The thing that saved you at 7 now restricts you at 40. But it keeps running because patterns don't ask permission. They just repeat. The tricky part is that harmful patterns rarely announce themselves as harmful. They disguise themselves as virtue, necessity, identity. I'm not conflict avoidant. I'm peaceful. I'm not overworking. I'm dedicated. I'm not people pleasing. I'm kind. I'm not numbing. I'm practicing self-care. The pattern wears whatever mask allows it to continue undisturbed. And you defend it, sometimes fiercely, because questioning the pattern feels like questioning yourself. A wandering ascetic once discovered this in the strangest way. His name was Ekapanna, and he'd convinced himself that suffering was the path to purity. Ikapana practiced austerities that made other ascetics wince. He stood on one leg for hours, sometimes entire days, until the standing leg swelled and the raised leg went numb. He exposed himself to elements deliberately, sitting in scorching sun during summer's peak, standing in cold rain during winter storms. He ate almost nothing, a handful of grain every few days, just enough to prevent death, but never enough for actual nourishment. He believed suffering purified the spirit, that the body was an obstacle to transcendence, and the more he punished it, the closer he'd get to liberation. This wasn't random cruelty. He had a whole philosophy supporting it, teachers who'd taught him, texts he could quote. Years passed this way. His body deteriorated visibly. Skin stretched over bones, hair falling out, teeth loosening, joints swelling from constant strain. But he told himself this meant progress. The worse he felt physically, the closer he must be spiritually. Other ascetics admired his dedication. "Look how much he endures," they'd whisper when he walked past, limping, eyes sunken, body trembling. Such commitment to the path. Their admiration fed the pattern. Every time doubt crept in, maybe this isn't working, maybe there's a better way, the admiration from others pushed it back down. He must be doing something right if people respected his discipline. But inside, where admiration couldn't reach, something else was happening. His mind wasn't becoming more peaceful, it was becoming more agitated. Constant pain demanded constant attention. His thoughts raced with suffering, the ache in his leg, the burning in his stomach, the pounding in his head. Where was the peace he'd been promised? Where was the transcendence? He'd wake before dawn, body screaming for rest, and force himself to stand. He'd watch the sun rise through eyes that barely focused, telling himself this discomfort was purification. He'd count the hours until he could allow himself to sit, then feel guilty for wanting to sit, then stand longer as punishment for the guilt. A recurring thought started appearing. Just a little more suffering, then I'll be pure. Another month of this, another year, another decade. Surely, there was a threshold where enough suffering would flip some internal switch and peace would flood in. So whenever doubt arose, he intensified the austerities. Not working yet? Try harder. Stand longer. Eat less. Endure more. The pattern was established. Discomfort with the practice meant the practice needed intensifying, not questioning. Any sign that something was wrong became proof that he wasn't trying hard enough. 10 years into this, Ekapana's body finally gave out. He was walking between villages, or trying to walk, really more stumbling, when his vision went dark, at the edges, and his legs folded beneath him. He collapsed on the side of the road, too weak to stand, barely conscious. A village woman found him there. She'd been returning from the market with supplies, and nearly stepped on what she thought was a pile of discarded rags before realizing it was a person. She knew who he was, the ascetic everyone whispered about, the one practicing such severe austerities. She also knew, looking at him now, that he was dying. She ran home and returned with a bowl of rice porridge. Simple food, nothing fancy, just rice cooked with water and a pinch of salt. She knelt beside him and held the bowl out. Ekapana's eyes focused on the bowl, steam rising from it, the smell of cooked grain. His stomach clenched with desperate hunger, but he turned his head away. "I don't eat such food," he whispered. "It's indulgence." The woman studied his face, the pride still visible, even as his body shut down. She didn't argue, didn't try to convince him, or explain why he was wrong, just placed the bowl beside him on the ground and walked away. Hours passed. Ekapana lay there, staring at the bowl. Sun moved across the sky, shadows lengthened, and the bowl sat there, steam long since dissipated, porridge cooling. His mind produced every justification for not eating it. This was a test of discipline. 10 years of practice shouldn't be abandoned for one moment of weakness. Suffering was the path. He'd committed to this. Other ascetics respected this. Turning back now would mean all those years were wasted. But underneath the justifications, a quieter voice. "You're dying." Not dying metaphorically, not dying to the ego, actually dying. Your body is shutting down, and when you're dead, there's no more path to walk. He thought about his teacher, the one who'd first shown him these practices. That teacher had been skeletal too, had died young after pushing his body past all reasonable limits. Everyone had called it a holy death. But lying here now, Ekapana wondered, what if it was just death? What if suffering until you die isn't transcendence, just suffering until you die? Finally, from sheer weakness, more than decision, Ekapana reached out. His hand shook so badly, he could barely hold the bowl. He brought one spoonful to his mouth. The taste exploded on his tongue. Not as temptation, not as indulgence, as life. His body recognized nourishment, the way drowning lungs recognize air. He took another spoonful, then another, and with each one, something inside him began to shift. Not his body just desperately absorbed the food it needed, but his mind, as strength trickled back, as his vision cleared slightly, as the fog of starvation began to lift, he could suddenly see the pattern clearly. 10 years. 10 years of increasing suffering, believing that more suffering meant more progress. 10 years of his body begging him to stop, and him interpreting those pleas as obstacles to overcome rather than wisdom to heed. 10 years of confusing self-destruction with self-transcendence. "I've been punishing the body as if it were the enemy," he said aloud to no one. But the body wasn't the enemy. The pattern was. He'd taken a genuine teaching, discipline, restraint, non-attachment to comfort, and twisted it into something harmful. Then defended that harmful version so thoroughly for so long that it became his identity. He wasn't Ekapana who practices discipline. He was Ekapana who suffers more than anyone, and that suffering was his worth. The pattern broke in that moment, not because he decided to abandon practice, but because he finally saw that what he'd been calling practice was actually just repetitive harm, wearing practice's clothing. Recovery took months. He stayed in that village, accepting the help he'd spent years refusing. The woman who'd brought the porridge let him stay in a small hut behind her house. She fed him carefully, small amounts at first, gradually increasing as his body remembered how to process food. And Ekapana began a different kind of practice: nourishment and discipline, rest and effort, care for the body and care for the mind, not punishing himself to achieve peace, but creating conditions where peace could actually arise. He sat in meditation, but ate regular meals. He practiced restraint, but slept full nights. He cultivated discipline, but listened when his body needed rest. And slowly, the agitation that 10 years of torture couldn't touch began to settle. Within months, what had eluded him through 10 years of torture arrived through balance, not the transcendence he'd imagined, something quieter and more stable, actual peace, not the exhausted numbness he'd been mistaking for peace. Years later, when people asked about his transformation, he said something that confused them. The harmful pattern wasn't the seeking. It was believing harm equaled progress. Maybe you recognize this pattern in different clothing, not extreme austerities, but the modern versions we rarely question. The person who works 70-hour weeks and calls it dedication, ignoring that their health is declining, their relationships are dying, and they're too exhausted to remember why they wanted success in the first place. The pattern says, more work equals more worth. The body says, please stop. The pattern wins, year after year. Or the person who says yes to everyone, taking on responsibilities they don't want, helping people who don't appreciate it, exhausting themselves to be seen as kind. The pattern says, other people's needs matter more than yours. The exhaustion says, this isn't sustainable. The pattern wins, relationship after relationship. Or the person who numbs every uncomfortable feeling with whatever's available: food, shopping, scrolling, substances, busyness. The pattern says, discomfort is the enemy. Avoid at all costs. The growing emptiness says, something's wrong. The pattern wins, day after day. Or the person who exercises obsessively, calling it health, while ignoring injured joints and depleted energy. or the person who pursues self-improvement relentlessly, reading every book, attending every workshop, never pausing to notice they're already enough, or the person who maintains perfect order in their home while their inner life remains chaotic and unexamined. Each started sensibly, usually as protection or coping. Working hard prevents poverty. Being kind prevents rejection. Avoiding pain prevents suffering. Exercise maintains health. Self-improvement enables growth. Organization creates calm. All true at first, when used appropriately. But patterns don't stop when circumstances change. They just keep running. The person who needed to work hard to escape poverty keeps working hard decades after financial security arrived. The child who needed to please difficult parents keeps pleasing everyone decades after leaving home. The teenager who numbed unbearable feelings keeps numbing in a life that's actually bearable now. The pattern continues past its usefulness because it's become identity, not strategy. This is who I am. This is how I operate. People know me as someone who... And here's what makes patterns so persistent. They feel true. When you're inside the pattern, it doesn't feel like a pattern. It feels like reality. Of course, you need to work this hard. Look at all the responsibilities you have. Of course, you need to say yes to everyone. What kind of person would you be if you said no? Of course, you need to avoid discomfort. Who seeks out pain deliberately? The pattern generates its own justification, creates its own necessity. How do you tell the difference between genuine practice and habitual harm? Ask one question. Does it actually create peace? Not immediately. Medicine can taste bitter. Necessary changes can feel uncomfortable at first. But over time, does this pattern lighten your load or add to it? Does it create more space in your life or fill every space with obligation? Does it make you more available to what matters or more defended against everything? Ekapanna thought his suffering was bringing him closer to peace, but it was actually making peace impossible. You can't be peaceful when your body is in constant agony. The overworker thinks their dedication is bringing them closer to security, but it's actually making security impossible. You can't feel secure when you're too exhausted to enjoy what you've built. The people pleaser thinks their helpfulness is bringing them closer to belonging, but it's actually making belonging impossible. You can't belong somewhere when you're never showing up as yourself. One pattern worth examining. Just one. Notice, when triggered, what do you automatically do? Someone criticizes you. Do you immediately defend or attack back or shut down? Something goes wrong. Do you reach for your phone or food or blame? You feel anxious. Do you work harder or people, please, or withdraw? Watch the automatic response without judging it. Then ask, does this genuinely solve the problem or just temporarily numb it? Does it make tomorrow easier or harder? Does it create the conditions for peace or just create the illusion of control. What if that pattern isn't you? What if it's just something you learned a long time ago and you can unlearn it? Not easily, not overnight, but possible. Sit with this gently for a moment. No judgment about whatever pattern you're seeing. These patterns served you once. They kept you safe when you needed safety, helped you cope when you needed coping, got you through situations that required exactly that response. Honor that. The child who learned to stay quiet during conflict, that pattern probably prevented harm. The teenager who learned to work obsessively, that pattern probably created opportunities. The young adult who learned to numb pain, that pattern probably enabled survival. Now you're just asking, do they still serve? Or just repeat? Does the protection still protect? Or has it become its own trap? Is the strategy still working? Or has it calcified into identity? Sometimes the hardest part isn't breaking the pattern. It's admitting you've been running one. Because that means all those years of defending it, all those justifications, all those times you said, "This is just who I am." Maybe that wasn't truth, just habit. But here's what Ekapana learned, and what you can learn too. Seeing the pattern doesn't erase the past. Those 10 years he spent suffering weren't wasted. They taught him exactly what doesn't work, and that knowledge informed everything that came after. Your years running the pattern weren't wasted either. They brought you here, to this moment where you can finally see it clearly enough to choose differently. You've changed your environment, examined your habits. The external shifts are happening. Now comes the internal work. The burdens carried not in your surroundings, but in your responses, your reactions, your automatic patterns of relating to difficulty. The third burden people carry is an emotion so common, so accepted, we barely notice its weight. It feels like strength, sounds like justice, masquerades as self-respect. But it's actually just another stone you've been holding too long, and your arms are tired. Anger feels like strength, like finally standing up for yourself, defending your boundaries, refusing to be walked over anymore. It feels like fire in your chest, clarity in your mind, righteousness fueling your words. It feels like power, but it's actually exhaustion, wearing power's mask. Every moment you spend in anger, your body floods with stress hormones. Your heart rate increases, blood pressure rises, digestion shuts down, your immune system weakens. This isn't metaphor or spiritual teaching, it's physiology. Anger costs you physically every single time you indulge it. And the psychological cost runs even deeper. Anger narrows your vision until you can only see the offense, the injustice, the person who wronged you. It hijacks your attention, occupying mental space you need for everything else: work, relationships, rest, joy. Try reading a book while furious. Try being present with your children while rehearsing an argument in your head. Try sleeping while rage loops through your thoughts like a song you can't stop hearing. The Buddha said it plainly. Holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You're the one who gets burned. Notice what he didn't say. He didn't say anger is wrong, or that you shouldn't feel it, or that feeling anger makes you a bad person. He said holding on to it burns you. The feeling arises naturally when you're hurt or threatened. That's just being human. The question is what you do with it once it arrives. This teaching gets misunderstood in two directions. Some people hear, "Don't hold anger," and think it means suppress it, deny it, pretend you're not angry when you clearly are. That's just a different trap. Suppressed anger doesn't disappear, it just goes underground and emerges sideways as passive aggression, chronic resentment, mysterious illnesses your doctor can't quite diagnose. Other people here don't hold anger and think it means you have to immediately forgive everyone, accept all mistreatment, become a doormat for anyone who wants to walk on you. Also not what the teaching means. The Buddha was talking about something more subtle, transforming your relationship with anger, not pretending it isn't there, not acting it out immediately, but seeing it clearly enough that you're no longer controlled by it. A nobleman once learned this through the cruelest test imaginable. His name was Paduma, and everything he'd built, reputation, relationships, safety itself, was stripped away by lies. Paduma came from noble birth, but lived more simply than his position required. While other nobles competed for influence and accumulated wealth, he focused on what the Buddha taught: gentleness, patience, equanimity. Not as performance, but as genuine practice. When servants made mistakes, he responded with understanding rather than punishment. When merchants shortchanged him, he let it go. When people spoke badly of him behind his back, he didn't retaliate. People in the kingdom knew him as someone you could trust, fair in dealings, honest in speech, calm in temperament. Parents pointed him out to their children. "See Paduma, that's what integrity looks like," which made him the perfect target. Another noble, we'll call him Devadatta, envied everything about Paduma. His reputation, his respect, the way people's faces softened when they spoke his name. Devadatta had more wealth, more land, more influence in court, but he didn't have what Paduma had, genuine regard from others. So Devadatta started spreading rumors, quietly at first, carefully, just planting seeds of doubt. "You know, I've heard Paduma's gentleness is actually cowardice. Someone told me he avoids conflict because he can't handle it, not because he's noble. I wonder if his simple lifestyle is actually failed ambition disguised as virtue." The rumors spread the way rumors do, whispered in markets, discussed at dinner tables, repeated until they took on the weight of fact. Within weeks, people who'd respected Paduma started viewing him through this new lens. His gentleness looked like weakness. His patience looked like passivity. His equanimity looked like indifference. Then Devadatta escalated. He started saying Paduma was dishonest in business dealings, that he cheated merchants, that his reputation for integrity was carefully constructed fraud. None of it was true, but truth doesn't matter once rumor gains momentum. People who'd once honored Paduma now crossed the street to avoid him. Merchants refused his business. Former friends stopped visiting. Some even mocked him openly in the streets. There goes the coward. Look, the fraud. How's your fake virtue today? Paduma's family was horrified. His brother came to him furious. You have to fight back. Defend your name. Destroy Devadatta's reputation the way he's destroying yours. You have resources. You have truth on your side. Use them. His sister pleaded, at least tell people what's really happening. Explain that these are lies. You're letting him win by staying silent. And Paduma felt it. The anger they wanted him to feel. It was there, rising in his chest like fire, hot and justified and demanding action. Everything in him wanted to lash out, to defend himself, to make Devadatta suffer the way he was suffering. But instead of acting on it, he observed it. He noticed the heat in his chest, the tightness in his jaw, the way his hands wanted to clench into fists, the thoughts rushing through his mind, plans for revenge, imagined confrontations, ways to publicly humiliate Devadatta. He acknowledged it all. Yes, anger is here. Of course it is. I'm being lied about. My reputation is being destroyed. People I thought were friends have turned on me. Anger makes sense. And then he asked himself something his family wasn't asking. If I act from this anger right now, what actually happens? He could see it clearly. If he retaliated with his own rumors about Devadatta, Devadatta would respond with worse rumors about him. If he confronted Devadatta publicly, it would become a spectacle people would gossip about for months, with both their reputations suffering. If he defended himself aggressively, it would look like exactly what Devadatta had accused him of being, someone whose gentleness was just a mask. Anger answered with anger creates an endless cycle. Both people get burned, and the fire spreads to everyone around them. Meanwhile, Devadatta wasn't finished. Seeing that his rumors were working, he took it further. He went to the king with an elaborate story. Paduma was plotting treason, gathering supporters to overthrow the throne, using his reputation for virtue as cover for treachery. The king, influenced by Devadatta, and already hearing rumors about Paduma's supposed dishonesty, believed it. Paduma was arrested in the middle of the night, dragged from his home, thrown into prison without trial. In the prison cell, cold stone, iron bars, guards who treated him like a traitor, Paduma faced the deepest test. Everything had been taken from him now. Not just reputation, but freedom itself. He was facing execution for treason he didn't commit, based on lies from someone who simply envied him. If there was ever a time for justified rage, this was it. The anger was there, massive and demanding. It wanted him to scream at guards, to curse Devadatta's name, to rage against the injustice until his voice gave out. It wanted him to fantasize about revenge, to plot elaborate punishment, to feed itself until it consumed everything else. Instead, Paduma practiced. Not as a spiritual performance, not to prove anything to anyone, just because the alternative was drowning in rage, and he could see exactly where that led. When anger arose, he observed it, noted it like weather passing through. Anger is present. There's heat. There's tightness. There are thoughts about revenge. He didn't try to make it go away, didn't fight it or suppress it, or judge himself for feeling it. Just acknowledged its presence without feeding it, without rehearsing grievances, without building elaborate stories about what he'd do to Devadatta if given the chance. And gradually, not quickly, not easily, but gradually, the anger lost its power. Like a fire without fuel, it burned itself out. Not because he pretended the injustice didn't hurt, not because he convinced himself it was fine to be falsely imprisoned, but because he saw clearly, anger doesn't correct injustice. It just adds suffering to suffering. He could be angry about being lied about and imprisoned for lies, or he could just be imprisoned for lies. Both situations were terrible, but one was bearable and one wasn't. Days turned into weeks. Paduma sat in his cell, practicing equanimity while his family frantically worked to prove his innocence. Other prisoners, watching him, couldn't understand it. "How are you so calm?" they'd ask. "Don't you want revenge?" "Wanting revenge would hurt me, not Devadatta," Paduma would say. "He's already done his damage. Why should I finish his work by poisoning myself from the inside?" Eventually, truth emerged, the way truth sometimes does, through channels completely unrelated to Paduma or his family. A merchant Devadatta had also wronged came forward with evidence of his schemes. Another noble Devadatta had attempted to manipulate, testified to his methods. The pattern of lies became visible, and suddenly, the king saw what he'd missed. Paduma was released. His reputation was restored. The king publicly apologized. Devadatta was arrested, imprisoned in the same cell Paduma had occupied. People gathered around Paduma, celebrating his vindication. But their celebration felt strange to him. They wanted revenge, wanted Devadatta punished severely, wanted justice that looked like suffering equal to what Paduma had endured. Someone asked him directly, "How did you endure such injustice without hatred? How did you not rage against Devadatta every day in that cell?" Paduma thought carefully before answering. "I endured it precisely by not adding hatred to it. Devadatta added suffering to my life with his lies. If I'd spent every day feeding my hatred, I would have completed his work. He would have destroyed my reputation from the outside, while I destroyed my peace from the inside. Instead, I chose to let him have only the power he'd already taken and keep my inner life as my own. Someone pressed further. But doesn't patience mean letting people walk over you? No, Paduma said. Patience isn't passive. It's the active choice not to multiply suffering. I was already suffering from false imprisonment. Adding rage would have multiplied it. Patience meant bearing what had to be borne without adding fuel to the fire. Maybe you're hearing this story and thinking, that's beautiful, but unrealistic. I can't be that patient. If someone lied about me like that, I'd lose my mind. And you might. Most people would. But here's what this teaching isn't saying. It's not saying you have to be perfect, or that you should let people mistreat you, or that anger is wrong and you're bad for feeling it. Paduma didn't approve of Devadatta's lies. He didn't think imprisonment was fine. He didn't pretend the injustice wasn't happening. He just chose not to poison himself with rage while he was already dealing with the poison of lies. Think about a time someone truly wronged you, not a minor annoyance, an actual betrayal, genuine harm, real injustice. The anger that came was natural, maybe even necessary as initial response. Your body saying, "This is wrong, defend yourself." The question isn't whether you should feel angry. You already do. The question is, what do you do with that anger once it arrives? You have 3 options. First option, feed it. Rehearse the grievance repeatedly in your mind. Tell everyone who listen about what this person did. Plan elaborate revenge scenarios you'll probably never act on. Check their social media to see if they're suffering enough. Bring it up in conversations that have nothing to do with it. This feels satisfying temporarily, like scratching an itch. But the itch gets worse the more you scratch. The anger grows, takes up more space, requires more feeding, until it's no longer an emotion you're feeling, but an identity you're living. Second option, fight it. Suppress the anger, deny it. Tell yourself, spiritual people, don't feel rage. Shame yourself for the very human response you're having. I shouldn't be angry. Anger is bad. I should forgive and move on. This looks like patience, but it's just repression with better PR. The anger doesn't go away. It just goes underground, emerging as passive aggression, mysterious health problems, sudden explosions over minor things months later. Third option, acknowledge it without acting from it. Feel the heat without becoming the fire. Notice anger is present the way you'd notice weather. It's raining. Doesn't mean you have to stand in the rain or pretend it's sunny. Just means you acknowledge current conditions. I feel angry is different from I am my anger. This person hurt me and I'm furious about it is true. Therefore, I must act on this fury immediately, doesn't follow. Next time anger arises, and it will, because you're human, and humans get angry, try this. Pause before responding. Not a long pause, just enough to create space between feeling and action. Could be 3 breaths, could be 3 minutes, could be 3 hours, if the situation allows. During that pause, notice where anger lives in your body. Is it heat in your chest, tension in your jaw, tightness in your shoulders, shaking in your hands? Just notice. Don't judge. Then ask, if I respond from this anger right now, what grows? If I wait until I'm clear, what becomes possible? Sometimes the answer will be, I need to respond now. This is urgent. Waiting isn't safe. Fine, respond. But you'll respond from awareness rather than pure reaction. And there's a difference. More often you'll see, responding from rage will make things worse, not better. Will multiply suffering rather than solve it. Will burn me along with whatever I'm trying to throw this hot coal at. This isn't about being perfect. You'll still get angry, still sometimes react before you've paused, still feed the anger occasionally when you meant to just acknowledge it. The practice isn't perfection. It's reducing the damage you cause yourself with your own rage. Take a breath right now. This is difficult teaching, maybe the hardest so far, because patience with others requires patience with yourself first. Notice, how do you speak to yourself when you make mistakes? When you fail at something, miss a deadline, say something stupid, hurt someone unintentionally, what's the inner voice like? Is it harsh, cruel, more vicious than you'd ever speak to anyone else? That's where patience practice actually begins. Not with the person who cut you off in traffic or the colleague who took credit for your work, with yourself, in the privacy of your own mind, in how you treat your own mistakes and limitations. You've released your toxic environment, examined your harmful patterns, and now you're beginning to transform your relationship with anger. These are visible burdens, heavy ones you can feel when you're carrying them. But there's a subtler burden many people carry without even knowing it's there. It disguises itself so cleverly as solution that we rarely recognize the trap. It promises satisfaction while delivering only more hunger. And it's probably operating in your life right now, quietly, beneath awareness. Modern life creates a specific kind of void, not the dramatic emptiness of tragedy or loss, but something quieter, more persistent, a chronic, low-level dissatisfaction that most people learn to live with the way you learn to live, with background noise. Disconnection from genuine community, despite being more connected than ever. Purposelessness underneath the busy schedule. The nagging sense that something's missing, even when nothing obvious is wrong. You have a job, a home, people who care about you, reasonable health, all the pieces that should add up to satisfaction. yet satisfaction doesn't arrive. So we compensate. We fill the void with things never designed to fill it. Shopping, when you're not looking for anything specific, just looking. Scrolling, when you're not seeking information, just scrolling. Eating when you're not hungry, just uncomfortable. Achieving when you don't need the achievement, just the validation it might bring. Pursuing romance not because you genuinely connect with someone, but because being alone feels unbearable. Staying constantly busy, because stopping means feeling things you'd rather not feel. None of these things are inherently bad. Shopping provides what you need. Internet contains useful information. Food nourishes your body. Achievement accomplishes real things. Romance brings genuine connection. Productivity moves life forward. They become problems when you use them to avoid feeling the void, instead of addressing what created it. The Buddha identified this pattern 2,500 years ago, craving as response to dissatisfaction. Not the craving itself as the problem, but what drives it. When there's a hole inside, you keep trying to fill it from the outside, but outside things can't fill inside holes. They just temporarily cover them. Don't judge the craving. Understand what it's trying to fix. What uncomfortable feeling are you trying to avoid by reaching for that thing right now? There's a teaching story about someone who tried every compensation method available and discovered something that changed everything. Her name was Pana, and she was born into wealth most people only imagine. Her father was a merchant who'd built a fortune through decades of successful trade, and Pana, his only child, inherited not just money, but access to everything money could buy. Fine silk clothes in every color, embroidered with gold thread, jewelry that caught light and held it, rubies, sapphires, pearls from distant seas, perfumes blended specifically for her by expert craftsmen, food prepared by cooks who'd trained for years to perfect each dish, entertainment whenever she wanted it, musicians, dancers, storytellers, servants who anticipated her needs before she voiced them. People envied her. If I had what she has, they'd say, I'd never be unhappy again. But underneath everything she possessed, persistent emptiness lived. Not dramatic or overwhelming, just always there, like a low hum you stop noticing until you're trying to sleep, and suddenly it's the only thing you can hear. So she tried filling it. If more possessions had made her happy before, maybe more possessions would make her happier now. More clothes, though her closets were already full. More jewelry, though she rarely wore what she had. More experiences. She attended every gathering, every performance, every event where important people might be, hoping that maybe this one would finally satisfy her. Each new thing brought a brief lift. The moment of acquisition felt good, choosing the item, completing the purchase, bringing it home, showing it to friends. For a few hours, maybe a day, the emptiness receded. Then it returned, deeper than before, like a tide, coming back, stronger. A pattern established itself so gradually she didn't notice it forming. Notice emptiness. Feel discomfort of that emptiness. Acquire something new. Feel briefly better. Emptiness returns deeper. Repeat. Her room filled with things she'd bought once and never touched again. Expensive instruments she'd intended to learn but hadn't. Books she'd meant to read but didn't. Art she'd purchased because owning it felt important, not because she actually loved it. Each item represented a moment when she'd thought, "This will make me happy." None of them had. Her schedule filled with engagements that left her exhausted, but unable to stop accepting invitations. Dinners with people she didn't particularly like. Performances she attended because being seen there mattered more than enjoying them. Parties where she smiled until her face hurt and came home feeling lonelier than if she'd stayed alone. She knew, somewhere, that this wasn't working, but knowing didn't stop the pattern. It just made her feel worse about continuing it. What's wrong with me? She'd think. I have everything. Why isn't it enough? Then one day, her father hired an elderly woman to help clean their home. The regular servants had too much work, and this woman, bent with age, hands rough from years of labor, arrived early one morning to help with the rooms. Panna watched her work in her room, moving slowly among all the unused possessions. The woman didn't rush, didn't seem bothered by the slow pace her body required. She hummed quietly while she worked. Not a tune anyone would recognize, just a sound of contentment. This bothered Panna more than it should have. This woman had nothing. Worn clothes, calloused hands, a life of service and labor. Yet she seemed genuinely at ease, in a way Panna, surrounded by luxury, never felt. "How can you be content with so little?" Panna asked, before she'd fully decided to speak. The old woman paused in her work, looked at Panna with eyes that had seen a lot of years. "What is there to be discontent about?" she asked, genuinely curious. Panna gestured at her own opulence, the silk clothes, the jewelry scattered on tables, the expensive but ignored possessions filling every surface. "But don't you wish for more? For what I have? For comfort and beauty and freedom from labor?" The woman smiled, not condescending, just amused. "I have food to eat when I'm hungry. I have shelter that keeps rain off my head. I have work that's useful. Someone needs these rooms cleaned, and I can clean them. My needs are met. What more should I wish for?" Panna felt frustration rising. This seemed like willful ignorance of reality. "But surely there's something you want that you don't have," she pressed. "Everyone wants something." The woman considered this seriously, not dismissing the question. "I suppose," she said slowly, "I want what I already have, and I have it, so I'm content." This confounded Panna completely. It sounded like circular logic, a trick of words that didn't mean anything real. You can't want what you already have. Wanting means lacking, means reaching for what's absent. But over the following weeks, as the woman continued working in their home, Pana found herself watching her, studying the way she moved through her day with steady energy that never spiked into excitement or dropped into despair, the way her face looked peaceful even when doing tedious work, the way she seemed genuinely present with whatever she was doing, not rushing through it to get to something better. Pana had everything this woman didn't have, yet the woman possessed something Pana had never managed to find: genuine ease. One evening, sitting alone in her room surrounded by possessions she'd acquired to fill the emptiness, Pana finally saw it. Contentment wasn't the result of fulfilling endless wants. It was seeing that enough was already here. Not resignation. I guess this is all I get. Recognition. This is actually sufficient. The void she'd been trying to fill with more clothes, more experiences, more approval, more everything. What if it wasn't actually a void? What if it was just space? Open space for being, for existing, without constantly needing to acquire or achieve or become something other than what she already was. She began practicing something simple. Before acquiring anything, whether an object, an experience, an engagement, she'd pause and ask, is this a genuine need or compensation for an uncomfortable feeling? If it was genuine need, she needed new shoes because old ones were worn through. She needed food because she was hungry. She'd get it without guilt. But if it was compensation, she wanted new shoes because feeling inadequate, and new shoes temporarily fixed that. She wanted food because loneliness felt unbearable and eating numbed it. She'd try something radical. She'd feel the uncomfortable feeling instead of running from it. Just for 60 seconds, just to see what happened. The first time she tried this, it felt nearly impossible. The emptiness arose, sharp and demanding. Her hand reached for her purse automatically, ready to go acquire something, anything. But she stopped herself, sat with the emptiness, felt it fully without trying to fix it. 60 seconds felt like an hour. The emptiness sat in her chest, heavy and uncomfortable. But it didn't destroy her. It was bearable, just barely, if she didn't fight it. And underneath the emptiness, she noticed something she'd never let herself notice before, a kind of stillness, like the space beneath waves, where water moves but doesn't churn. The void she'd been trying to fill revealed itself not as lack, but as openness, room for being, not emptiness, requiring filling. She didn't transform overnight. Old patterns don't break easily. Many times, she still reached for the familiar compensations, shopping when uncomfortable, seeking approval when uncertain, staying busy when scared of stopping. But gradually, the grip loosened. She could feel the urge to compensate and sometimes choose differently. Could recognize, I don't actually want this thing. I just want to not feel what I'm feeling, and let the urge pass without acting on it. Months later, the old cleaning woman was working in her room again. Pana, sitting quietly, rather than rushing to another engagement, watched her move with that same peaceful presence. I think I understand now, Pana said. What you said about wanting what you already have. The woman looked up, smiled. What changed? I stopped trying to fill the space, Pana said. Turns out it was never empty. Maybe you recognize this pattern wearing different masks. This teaching gets misunderstood as anti-pleasure or pro-deprivation, like the Buddha wants everyone living in bare rooms, eating only rice. Not what it means. Pana didn't become an ascetic after her realization. She still wore nice clothes and ate good food, and attended gatherings with friends. She just discovered the difference between enjoyment and compensation. Enjoyment is genuine appreciation of what is. The meal tastes good. You're hungry. Eating satisfies that hunger. That's wholesome. You see something beautiful and pause to appreciate it. That's wholesome. You spend time with people you genuinely like. That's wholesome. Compensation is attempting to fill an inner void with outer things. You're not hungry, but you eat because loneliness feels unbearable and food temporarily numbs it. You don't need anything, but you shop because feeling inadequate is painful, and acquiring things briefly makes you feel better. You don't want to go out, but you do, because sitting alone with your thoughts is terrifying. Same action, eating, shopping, socializing, completely different motivation, completely different result. Modern culture is literally designed to keep you compensating. Every advertisement tells you you're insufficient without this product. Every algorithm promises the next video will finally satisfy you. Every upgrade, every new feature, every limited time offer says the same thing. You're not enough as you are, but this purchase might fix that. And it works because we believe it. Not consciously. Consciously you know that buying new shoes won't solve your existential crisis. But the compensation pattern runs deeper than conscious thought. It operates automatically. Discomfort arises. Reach for familiar fix. Discomfort temporarily recedes. Pattern reinforced. Notice the distinction in your own life. Eating a meal because you're hungry and food tastes good, that's eating. Eating to avoid feeling lonely, or bored, or anxious, that's compensation. Buying something you'll genuinely use and enjoy, that's a purchase. Shopping to feel temporarily better about yourself, that's compensation. Checking your phone because someone messaged you, that's communication. Scrolling because you can't sit with your own thoughts for 30 seconds, that's compensation. Working because the work matters and you're engaged with it, That's productivity. Working constantly, because stopping means facing things you'd rather avoid. That's compensation. The action looks the same from outside. The difference is internal. What's driving it? What it's trying to fix? What it actually accomplishes? What do you reach for when uncomfortable feelings arise? Not to judge yourself for it. Everyone has compensation methods. They're how we survive difficulties we weren't equipped to handle differently. Just to see it clearly. To notice the pattern operating instead of being operated by it without awareness. Then experiment. Next time the urge arises, to shop, to eat, to scroll, to work, to seek approval, whatever your particular method is, pause. Just for 60 seconds, feel the uncomfortable feeling you're trying to avoid. Not forever, not as a test of endurance, just long enough to notice the discomfort is bearable. Unpleasant, yes, but bearable. And underneath it, there might be something worth paying attention to. Maybe loneliness is pointing to need for genuine connection, not distraction. Maybe anxiety is pointing to something actually wrong that needs addressing, not numbing. Maybe boredom is pointing to lack of genuine engagement with life, not need for more entertainment. Or maybe there's just space there, open, available space that doesn't need filling, just allows being. What if your compensation methods aren't personality traits, but just habits responding to difficulty? I'm a stress eater. Sounds like identity, but it's really just, when stressed, I learn to eat for comfort. That's a habit, not your nature. Habits can change. I'm a workaholic. Sounds like identity, but it's really, when uncomfortable feelings arise, I learn to stay busy. That's a pattern, not who you are. Patterns can shift. I'm addicted to my phone sounds like identity, but it's really, when bored or anxious, I learned to scroll for relief. That's a compensation method, not your essence. Methods can be replaced. This teaching requires gentleness you might not be used to offering yourself. We've all developed compensation methods. They helped us survive situations where we didn't have better tools. The teenager who learned to cope with family chaos by staying busy at school, that pattern served them. The adult still staying busy 20 years later when there's no chaos to escape, the pattern is just repeating now, no longer serving. Now you're asking, do they still serve or just distract? Do they genuinely satisfy or just temporarily cover what needs attention? Finding contentment doesn't mean wanting nothing, feeling nothing, becoming some enlightened being who floats above human needs and desires. It means recognizing that underneath the endless craving for more, enough is already here. You can want things, can pursue goals, seek experiences, improve circumstances. The difference is whether you're reaching from emptiness or from enoughness. Whether you're compensating for lack or genuinely engaging with life, you've released your toxic environment. You've examined your harmful patterns. You've begun transforming anger into patience. And now you're seeing how compensation methods have been operating, all the ways you've tried to fill from the outside what can only be recognized from the inside. These are the visible burdens, the ones you can name and point to. But there's something more fundamental operating beneath all of them, so fundamental to how you move through the world that it feels like reality itself, rather than one way of relating to reality. The fifth burden is woven so deeply into your sense of self that noticing you're carrying it requires a shift in perspective most people never make. It's not your environment or your patterns or your emotions or your cravings. It's the lens through which you interpret everything that happens, and it's exhausting in ways you've stopped noticing. The ego isn't bad. It's a survival mechanism that helped our species evolve. The capacity to distinguish self from other, to protect your interests, to maintain boundaries. These are useful functions. You need some sense of self to navigate the world without dissolving into whatever's around you. The problem isn't having an ego. It's making yourself the center of every experience, taking neutral events personally, filtering everything through the lens of, how does this affect me? Someone cuts you off in traffic. How dare they disrespect me like that? Not, they're in a hurry, or they didn't see me. It's personal attack against you specifically. A friend doesn't text back, what did I do wrong? Not, they're probably busy. It's about you, your worth, what you failed at. A colleague gets promoted. Why not me? Not good for them. It's about how you're being passed over, undervalued, unfairly treated. Everything filtered through this narrow aperture of self-concern. Every experience processed first through, what does this mean about me? It's exhausting, makes you fragile, reactive, constantly vigilant for threats to your importance. You can't rest because everything might be about you, and you have to be ready to defend yourself against slights real and imagined. The weather affects your mood, not because weather affects everyone, but because rain specifically ruined your plans. Traffic delays make you furious, not because delays are universally frustrating, but because you're being personally obstructed. Someone's distraction feels like rejection because their attention should be on you. This constant self-referencing creates a particular kind of suffering the Buddha identified clearly. Not the suffering of pain or loss. Those happen to everyone. The suffering of making everything revolve around a self that feels perpetually under siege. The Buddha's teaching isn't to destroy the ego. That's impossible and unhealthy. It's to shift the center from self to interconnection. To see that you're one point in a vast web of beings, not the center being attacked by the universe. A woman once discovered this shift through the most devastating loss imaginable. Her name was Latukika, and before tragedy forced change, Her entire world revolved around protecting what was hers. Latukika lived for her family, not in the healthy way people live for what they love, but in the anxious way someone guards what they fear losing. Every decision filtered through one question: how does this affect my family's welfare? She was protective to the point of suffocation. Her children couldn't play with certain neighbor kids. Those families weren't careful enough, might introduce bad influences. Her husband couldn't take business opportunities that required travel. Being away from home meant losing control over family safety. Her elderly parents had to follow strict routines she'd established. Deviation meant risk she couldn't tolerate. "My children must succeed," she'd say. Not, "Children should be supported." "My children," as if other people's children were competitors or threats. "My family must be comfortable," she'd insist. Not, "Families deserve comfort." "My family," as if comfort was scarce and had to be hoarded. "My reputation must be preserved," she'd worry. Not, "Honesty matters." "My reputation," as if what others thought determined her worth. Her world was small and tightly controlled, with her at the center, like a spider in a web, feeling every tremor. Everything outside that circle registered as either irrelevant or threat. Other people's problems didn't matter unless they might affect her family. Other people's joys were neutral unless they somehow diminished her own. Friends found her difficult to be close to because every conversation somehow became about her concerns. If you mentioned your child was sick, she'd talk about how she prevented her children from getting sick. If you shared excitement about a promotion, she'd mention her husband's superior position. She couldn't celebrate with you or grieve with you. Only compare your situation to hers and ensure hers remained superior. The emotional reality of living this way was constant, grinding, anxiety. When yourself is the center and everything threatens that center, you're never safe. There's always something to worry about, some new angle of potential harm, some way things could go wrong and affect your carefully maintained world. She didn't sleep well. Nights meant lying awake, running through scenarios. What if this happens? What if that fails? What if someone does something that impacts us? She'd get up multiple times to check on her children, even though they were old enough to not need checking. She'd review conversations looking for hidden meanings, veiled insults, signs that someone was trying to harm her family's standing. Her stomach hurt constantly from the tension. Her shoulders stayed tight, no matter how much she tried to relax them. She snapped at people over small things because she was operating at maximum stress all the time, and any additional demand felt unbearable. Then her youngest child got sick. Not unusual illness. Children get sick. It's part of childhood. But this one didn't resolve the way illnesses usually did. Fever that wouldn't break, despite remedies. Strength draining from a body that should have been vibrant with youth. Healers came, tried their medicines, left with worried faces they tried to hide. Latukika did everything possible, everything she could control, She controlled temperature in the room, quality of food, cleanliness of bedding, exact timing of medicines. But some things can't be controlled through vigilance. Some things happen regardless of how tightly you grip. 3 weeks after the fever started, her child died. The grief obliterated everything, not the gentle sadness people sometimes describe. This was annihilation. The center of her world, the thing she'd organized her entire life around protecting, had been destroyed despite all her efforts. For days she barely moved, couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't do anything except exist in the crushing weight of loss. The house that had been full of her controlling energy became silent, except for her occasional animal sounds of grief. Her remaining family tried to comfort her, but she couldn't receive it. How could they understand? This was her child, her loss, her unbearable pain. Everything was still filtered through that narrow lens of mine, even grief. Eventually, because humans can't stay motionless forever, and grief demands some form of movement, she left the house. Not with destination or purpose, just walking, because staying still felt like suffocating. She found herself near a grove where the Buddha was teaching. She hadn't intended to go there, didn't care about teachings or philosophy or anything beyond the pain consuming her. But there were people gathered, and sometimes being near other humans helps even when connection feels impossible. She sat at the edge of the crowd, barely hearing words. The Buddha was talking about suffering, about illness and death, as conditions all beings face. Standard teaching she'd probably heard before and dismissed as obvious. But something penetrated the grief this time. One phrase: every being who lives will experience loss, illness, death. Wait, every being? She looked around at the faces near her. Old man sitting to her left, deeply lined face. He'd probably buried children, maybe grandchildren. Young mother with infant on her lap. She probably lived in terror of exactly what Latukika had just experienced. Middle-aged merchant behind her. He'd lost parents, siblings, friends. Each person here carried their own version of what she was feeling. Not the same losses, but the same shape of grief. The same devastating experience of loving something and losing it. Something shifted. Not the grief that remained massive, crushing, real, but the framing around it changed. This wasn't the universe punishing her specifically. Wasn't about her worth or her failures, or whether she'd controlled things correctly. It was what happens in a world where everything that arises eventually passes, where every being faces the same fundamental vulnerabilities. Her grief didn't diminish, but the extra weight, the why me, the what did I do wrong, the how is this fair, that started to lift. Not because she had answers, but because she saw those questions came from the same egocentrism that had made her life so anxious before this happened. She kept sitting as the teaching continued, started actually hearing what was being said, instead of being trapped entirely in her own experience. The Buddha talked about how we all suffer, and how that shared suffering could become the basis for connection rather than isolation. How recognizing your pain in others' faces opens something that self-centered fear keeps closed. Latukika began noticing others' pain, not just her own. The old man's stiffness, when he stood, suggested joints that hurt constantly. The young mother's exhaustion showed in how she held her baby, tender but depleted. The merchant's worry creased his forehead even when he smiled. Each person carrying their version of difficulty, each one navigating a life that included loss and fear and uncertainty. Her suffering wasn't special or unique. It was the universal condition she'd previously only noticed when it affected her circle. Natural compassion arose, not forced, not performed, just the organic response to recognizing suffering and seeing it clearly. If I hurt this much, and this old man has probably hurt this much, multiple times, then, if this young mother fears what I just experienced, if all of us are navigating the same fundamental vulnerabilities, then the lens shifted from how does everything affect me to we're all in this together. Over following weeks, Latukika's grief continued. Losing a child isn't something you get over. It's something that changes you permanently. But alongside the grief, something else grew. She started noticing her elderly neighbor struggling to carry water. Before, she would have seen this only if it somehow threatened her interests. Now, she saw it as shared difficulty. Getting older is hard. Watching your body weaken is frightening. Needing help is humbling. She offered to help. She started listening when her friend talked about her troubles. Before, she would have redirected conversation to her own concerns or offered advice designed to make the problem go away quickly so she could return to her worries. Now she just listened, recognizing that her friend needed to be heard, not fixed. She started seeing her remaining children differently, not as extensions of herself that needed controlling to stay safe, but as separate beings navigating their own difficulties. Her protective urges remained. Parents don't stop caring, but they shifted from suffocating control to supportive presence. This didn't fix her loss, didn't bring her child back or erase the pain, but something strange happened as her circle of care expanded beyond self-centered concerns. The self-centered pain that had felt unbearable became bearable. Not because it got smaller, but because she wasn't relating to it through the lens of, why is this happening to me? Just, this is happening, as it happens to all beings. That shift, from personal attack to universal condition, changed everything about how she carried the grief. Maybe you're recognizing this pattern in quieter forms. Not the dramatic loss Latukika faced, but the constant self-referencing that exhausts you daily. This teaching gets misunderstood as think about others instead of yourself, like you're supposed to abandon your own needs and become some selfless saint who never considers what you want or need. Not what it means. The teaching is subtler than that, not replacing one center with another, seeing that there is no fixed center, just an interconnected web where everyone affects everyone else. When you're hurt, the egocentric response is, "This is happening to me." Singular, personal, isolated suffering that proves you're being singled out by the universe for mistreatment. The wisdom response is, "This is happening as it happens to all beings." Still acknowledging your pain, not minimizing it, but placing it in context of shared human experience. This doesn't diminish your pain. Actually, removing the extra layer of "why me" often makes the original pain more bearable. You're dealing with what's actually happening instead of also dealing with the story about how you're being personally victimized. Someone wrongs you. The egocentric response, "How could they do this to me?" All the emphasis on me, your hurt feelings, your damaged pride. How dare they treat you this way? The compassionate response, what suffering in them led to creating suffering for others? Not excusing the harm, not saying it's acceptable, just recognizing that hurt people, and understanding this doesn't require approval. Both perspectives can coexist. They hurt me, and they probably hurt others too, which suggests they're operating from their own pain. You can hold them accountable and recognize their behavior as symptom of their difficulty. The difference is, the second perspective doesn't add the extra drama of wounded ego, doesn't make you the main character in a tragedy where the universe conspires against you specifically. Just recognizes harm happened, needs addressing, and also exists in larger context of beings creating suffering because they're suffering. There's important distinction between healthy self-care and egocentrism. Self-care says, I need rest, boundaries, nourishment, recognizing your genuine needs and meeting them appropriately. This is wise, necessary, not selfish. Egocentrism says, my needs matter more than everyone else's, demanding special treatment, expecting others to accommodate you while you accommodate no one, making every situation about how it affects you. This creates suffering for you and everyone around you. You can take care of yourself while recognizing others also need care. Can set boundaries while respecting others have boundaries too. Can prioritize your well-being without making your well-being the only thing that matters. Notice egocentrism operating in your daily experience. Count how many thoughts start with I, me, my, mine, mine. Not to judge yourself, just to see the pattern. You might be surprised how much mental energy goes to self-referencing thoughts. Then experiment with reframing just one. Take something you're experiencing as my problem and reframe it as a problem humans face. I'm anxious about this deadline becomes deadlines create anxiety for people. Same experience, different framing. One makes you the center under attack. The other recognizes shared difficulty. I'm hurt that they didn't invite me becomes not being included hurts. Still acknowledging the pain, but removing the extra layer of personal offense. Why is this happening to me? Becomes this is difficult, as many things are difficult for beings. Not minimizing, universalizing. Notice whether this makes the experience heavier or lighter. Often, removing the personal drama actually makes the underlying difficulty more manageable. What if you're not the center being attacked by the universe? What if you're one point in a vast web of beings, all navigating difficulty together? Does that thought create more pressure or less? This teaching asks something genuinely radical. Not be selfless. That's impossible and unhealthy. Trying to erase your needs completely just creates different problems. It asks you to see beyond self as center, without losing sight of self as valid point in the web. You matter, and you're not the only thing that matters. Both true, simultaneously. The paradox is that when you stop defending your ego constantly, you actually become more resilient, not less. When not everything is personal attack requiring defense, you have energy for what actually needs attention. Rain delays your plans. Before, why does this always happen to me? After, rain delays plans. That's what rain does. Second framing doesn't make you victim, doesn't require taking it personally, allows you to just deal with what's actually happening. Someone's distracted when you're talking. Before, they don't respect me enough to pay attention. After, they're distracted, probably dealing with something difficult. Second framing doesn't make their behavior about your worth, allows you to either let it go or address it directly, without wounded pride driving the response. Colleague gets promotion you wanted. Before, I'm being overlooked and undervalued. After, promotions create complicated feelings in everyone who wanted them. Second framing acknowledges disappointment without adding narrative about personal victimization. The shift from egocentric lens to interconnected awareness doesn't make you doormat. Actually makes you stronger, because you're not constantly reactive to everything that might threaten your importance. You can address problems without making them personal dramas, can set boundaries without wounded ego driving them, can ask for what you need without demanding special treatment. You've released toxic environment, examined harmful patterns, begun transforming anger, seen through compensation methods. Now you're questioning the lens itself, the self-centered filter that makes everything about defending and maintaining your importance. These are the external and emotional burdens you can identify and work with directly. But there are two more burdens remaining, both more subtle, both operating constantly beneath awareness. One lives in how your mind moves, the other in what your mind believes, both foundational to everything else you're carrying. The sixth burden is one you might be carrying right now, this very moment, even as you listen to these words, trying to find relief from it. Your mind produces somewhere between 50,000 and 70,000 thoughts each day. Most of them you don't even notice. They run in the background like programs on a computer you forgot to close. But they're there, constantly, a stream of commentary about everything happening, everything that happened, everything that might happen. Most of these thoughts are repetitive, replaying conversations from yesterday, rehearsing ones that might happen tomorrow, judging what's happening right now. The same worries cycling through again and again. The same regrets revisited from slightly different angles. The same plans made and remade without ever being acted on. This mental noise exhausts you, even when you're not consciously aware of it. Like having a radio playing constantly in the background, even at low volume, it drains your battery. You wonder why you're tired when you haven't done anything physically demanding. Your mind has been running at full speed all day, generating thought after thought after thought, most of them serving no useful purpose. The Buddha described the untrained mind as a monkey jumping through trees, grasping at one branch, immediately reaching for the next, never settling, always moving, driven by restlessness it can't name or control. The monkey doesn't choose where to jump, it just jumps, reacting to whatever catches its attention. Your mind does this with thoughts, jumps from one to the next without your conscious direction. You're trying to focus on one thing, and suddenly you're thinking about something completely different. You didn't decide to think it. It just appeared, and your attention followed. Most people assume this is just how minds work, that you have no choice but to be carried along by whatever your mind produces. And in one sense, that's true. Thoughts will arise, whether you want them to or not. You can't stop your mind from thinking any more than you can stop your heart from beating. Meditation changes your relationship with thinking, moves you from prisoner to observer. Meditation isn't about stopping thoughts. That's the most common misconception, and it causes most people to give up before they've really started. They sit down, close their eyes, try to empty their mind, and within seconds, thoughts flood in. I'm doing this wrong, they think. My mind is too busy for meditation. A busy mind isn't the obstacle to meditation. It's the normal condition meditation works with. You're not trying to achieve some supernatural state of thoughtlessness. You're learning to see thoughts clearly enough that they stop controlling you. A sage once spent decades trying to master this, and what he discovered changed how he understood his own mind. His name was Muga, and he lived in a forest, practicing meditation with an intensity that bordered on desperation. His goal was simple: still the mind completely, reach perfect concentration, achieve the kind of mental silence he'd heard other meditators describe. He'd heard stories of monks who could sit for hours without a single thought arising, masters who'd achieved such perfect concentration that external sounds didn't register, physical discomfort didn't register, time itself seemed to stop. That's what he wanted. That perfect stillness, that complete control over his own mental processes. So he sat every morning before dawn, every evening after dark, and often throughout the day when responsibilities allowed. He'd find a spot under a tree, settle into posture, close his eyes, and attempt to stop his mind from producing thoughts. The first few minutes were always the hardest. He'd barely settled before thoughts started appearing, memories from childhood surfacing without invitation, plans for tomorrow forming without his conscious input, judgments about his meditation practice. This is going well. This is going poorly. Why am I so distracted today? He'd push them away, try to return to emptiness, but pushing one thought away just made space for another to appear, like playing a game where you hit one mole and 3 more pop up. Years passed this way. He sat daily, fighting his thoughts daily, failing daily. Some days he'd achieve brief stretches of quiet, maybe 30 seconds, maybe a minute, before the next thought appeared and shattered his concentration. The frustration grew with each session. Why can't I control my own mind? Other people seem to manage it. Teachers spoke of concentration so deep that hours passed like moments. Yet here he was, unable to maintain focus for even 5 minutes, without his mind wandering off to some trivial concern. He tried harder, extended his meditation sessions. If shorter sits weren't working, maybe longer ones would. Adopted stricter discipline, waking earlier, sitting later, eating less to reduce the body's distractions. Studied more texts about concentration, looking for the technique he must be missing, the secret method that would finally give him control. But the harder he tried, the worse it got. His mind became a battlefield. Him on one side, his thoughts on the other, engaged in constant warfare. Every thought that arose was an enemy to be defeated. Every moment of distraction was a failure to be ashamed of. Every meditation session became an exercise in self-criticism. The emotional reality of this approach was exhausting. He'd finish a meditation session more agitated than when he'd started. Instead of peace, he found tension. Instead of clarity, he found frustration. Instead of freedom, he found a prison where he was both prisoner and guard, constantly punishing himself for infractions he couldn't seem to stop committing. And the thoughts kept coming. In fact, the harder he fought them, the louder they became, like turning up the volume on that background radio instead of turning it down. One afternoon, exhausted from another failed meditation session, Muga walked to a nearby stream. He needed to move, to do something other than sit and fight his own mind. He found a flat rock near the water's edge and sat there. Not to meditate, he was too tired for that, just to rest. The water flowed past him, clear and constant. He watched it move around rocks in its path. The water didn't fight the rocks, didn't try to move them or go through them, didn't get angry at them for being obstacles, just flowed around them, naturally, effortlessly. A leaf fell from a tree above, landed on the water's surface. The stream carried it along, didn't grasp at it, didn't push it away, didn't judge whether leaves should or shouldn't be floating there, just carried it naturally downstream until it caught on something or floated out of sight. Muga watched this for a long time. Water flowing, leaves floating, everything moving naturally without force, without resistance, without the kind of desperate control he'd been trying to impose on his mind. Wait. What if mind is like stream? What if thoughts are like leaves? What if the problem isn't the thoughts themselves, but his relationship with them? He'd been treating thoughts like enemies to destroy, but the stream didn't treat leaves as enemies. The stream didn't treat rocks as enemies. It just flowed, naturally, accommodating whatever appeared in its path. Muga returned to his meditation spot with this new understanding, settled into posture, closed his eyes, and waited for thoughts to arise. They came immediately, as always. But this time, instead of fighting them, he just watched. Thought appeared, "I'm hungry." Old response would have been, "No, bad thought, I'm meditating, go away," followed by frustration at having been distracted, shame at lacking discipline, determination to fight harder next time. New response, "Ah, thought about hunger, interesting." That was all, just noting the thought had appeared, not judging it, not fighting it, not following it into a whole narrative about what he'd eat later and whether he should be hungry now or wait until evening and what that said about his discipline. The thought arose. He noted it, and then, this was the surprising part, it passed. Naturally, without him needing to do anything, like a leaf floating downstream. Another thought appeared, "This isn't working." Old response would have been panic, agreement, spiraling into self-criticism. New response, "Ah, doubt. There's a thought about failure." The thought didn't control him now, didn't need to be fought or believed, just observed, noted, allowed to pass. Another thought, "Maybe I'm finally getting it." Old response would have been excitement, grasping, trying to hold on to this, success. New response, "Ah, excitement, thought about achievement." Neither believing the thought nor rejecting it, just watching it arise and pass like everything else. He practiced this way for weeks, months, not fighting thoughts, not following them, just observing them with the same neutral attention the stream gave to leaves floating on its surface. Don't grab them, don't push them away, just watch them pass. Gradually, something shifted, not all at once, not dramatically, but like dawn breaking. You don't see the exact moment darkness becomes light. You just suddenly notice it's day. Thoughts still arose. They never stopped arising. His mind produced the same 50,000 thoughts it always had, but they were no longer compelling in the same way. He could watch the thought, "I'm failing at this," without believing it. Could notice the thought, "I'm enlightened now," without grasping it. Could observe the thought, "This is boring," without needing to do something about it. The mind still produced its mental weather, thoughts, memories, plans, judgments, fantasies, but he was no longer battered by every breeze. He could sit in the storm of his own thinking and remain unmoved, not because the storm had stopped, but because he'd learned to be the space the storm moved through, rather than something being blown around by it. Peace wasn't the absence of thoughts. It was freedom from being controlled by them. The modern misconception about meditation is that it empties the mind, makes it silent, blank, free of all mental activity. People sit down expecting to achieve this impossible state, and when thoughts keep arising, as they always will, they conclude they're bad at meditation. Meditation changes your relationship with the contents of your mind. That's all. That's everything. You don't need a silent mind to have a peaceful mind. You need a wise relationship with your noisy mind. Think about being in a room with a loud television. If you're absorbed in the show, the noise consumes you. Every sound, every image demands your attention, controls what you're thinking and feeling. If you step back, see, it's just a television. You can have peace, even with noise present. The TV still makes sound, but you're no longer identified with whatever's on the screen. You remember, you're the space the TV exists in, not the show being broadcast. Thoughts work the same way. You don't have to believe every thought that arises. Don't have to follow every thought wherever it wants to lead you. Don't have to act on every impulse, judgment, or fantasy your mind produces. Try this right now. Notice the next thought that appears in your mind. Instead of automatically believing it or following it, just note what kind of thought it is. Thought about past, remembering. Thought about future, planning. Judgment about something or someone, judging. Random image or fantasy, imagining. You're not trying to stop these thoughts, not trying to make them go away, or punishing yourself for having them. Just noting them the way you'd note weather. It's raining doesn't require you to have an opinion about rain, or to stop the rain, or to feel bad about yourself for not being able to control meteorology. Do this for just 2 minutes daily. Sit somewhere quiet. Close your eyes or keep them open, whatever feels more natural. And when thoughts arise, not if, when, just note them. Thinking, planning, worrying, remembering. 2 minutes seems short until you try it. Then you discover how constantly your mind produces thoughts, and how strong the habit is to believe them all, follow them all, act on them all. Your thoughts aren't you. They're just weather passing through the sky of awareness. This practice takes time. Muga spent decades figuring out what you can learn in weeks or months if you understand the principle from the start. Even then, years might pass before the shift really settles in. Before you can sit with your thoughts the way you sit with rain, present, affected by it, but not believing rain is attacking you personally, or that you've failed as a person for not being able to stop it. Even a small shift helps. Seeing thoughts as events rather than commands. Recognizing you can observe thinking without being controlled by every thought. Understanding that mental noise doesn't mean you're broken. It means you have a human brain doing what human brains do. Your mind will always think. That's its nature, like how hearts pump blood and lungs breathe air. You can't stop it, and you don't need to. Freedom isn't in stopping the mind. It's in not being the mind's prisoner. One final burden remains, the most subtle, the most foundational, the one even advanced practitioners sometimes miss because it hides in plain sight, disguised as wisdom itself. This last burden is what you believe about reality, about truth, about how things actually are. And ironically, releasing it might be harder than releasing any of the 6 burdens before it. The irony of the spiritual path is that you can become attached to beliefs about liberation, attached to the very teachings meant to free you from attachment. I must practice this way. Only this tradition is valid. Truth looks like this. Even I must let go becomes another thing to grasp. You start the path, carrying burdens, toxic environment, harmful patterns, anger, compensation methods, egocentrism, mental noise. You learn to release them one by one. Then you discover you've been picking up new burdens along the way, the right way to meditate, the correct understanding of teachings, the proper interpretation of what liberation means. The Buddha saw this tendency clearly. He compared his teachings to a raft for crossing a river. Once you've crossed to the other shore, you don't carry the raft on your back. The teachings are tools for crossing, not destinations to worship. They're meant to be used, not clung to. This final freedom means releasing even correct views, seeing truth directly instead of through the filter of concepts about truth. Not because concepts are wrong, they can point accurately toward reality, but because the map isn't the territory, and staring at a map of water doesn't quench thirst. A scholar once learned this in the most humbling way possible. His name was Attadatta, and he was renowned throughout the region for his mastery of Buddhist teachings. He'd memorized the entire canon, every discourse, every verse, every instruction the Buddha had given. He could recite any teaching perfectly, from memory, without hesitation. Students traveled for weeks to study with him. They'd arrive exhausted from the journey and leave months later with notebooks full of his explanations, his interpretations, his scholarly insights into what each teaching really meant. He had a reputation for being able to answer any question about the teachings, resolve any apparent contradiction, explain any difficult passage. Attadatta took pride in this mastery. Not in an obvious way. He didn't boast or show off, but underneath his humility lived a quiet certainty. I know the Buddha's teaching completely. He could trace the evolution of any concept through different discourses, could explain how the teaching on emptiness related to the teaching on dependent origination, related to the teaching on non-self, could cite chapter and verse to support any point he made. His understanding was comprehensive, precise, internally consistent. One afternoon, a simple forest monk arrived at the monastery. Word had reached him about Attadatta's reputation, and he'd come to pay respects during his wandering. This monk had no scholarly training. He was barely literate, could recognize enough characters to read basic instructions, but couldn't recite even a single discourse from memory. He'd spent the last 20 years living alone in the forest, practicing meditation, growing his own food, seeing almost no one. But something about his presence stopped people in their tracks. He moved with a quality of ease that wasn't effort or performance. When he sat, he simply sat, not performing sitting, not thinking about sitting, just sitting. When he ate, he simply ate. There was no gap between him and what he was doing. No commentary running in the background about whether he was doing it correctly. Attadatta noticed this immediately. It bothered him more than he wanted to admit. He invited the forest monk to tea, curious and slightly condescending. "Tell me," Attadatta asked, "what do you know of the Buddha's teachings?" The monk thought for a moment. "I don't know much," he said simply. "I just sit, breathe, watch my mind." Attadatta felt a flash of superiority. This monk was ignorant of the vast body of teachings he'd spent decades mastering. "But have you studied the discourses?" he pressed. "Do you understand dependent origination, the chain of causation that binds beings to suffering?" The monk smiled, not defensively. "I experience what the Buddha described," he said. "Whether I can name it using the proper terms, that seems less important." This response deeply unsettled Attadatta. How could this monk claim to experience the teachings without understanding them properly? How could he practice effectively without knowing the complete system, the way each piece fit together, the precise definitions that distinguished one concept from another? But he couldn't deny what he was seeing. This ignorant monk possessed something he didn't, a quality of peace that wasn't theoretical. Attadatta could explain peace in extraordinary detail, could describe its causes and conditions, could outline the path that led to it. The forest monk was simply peaceful, without needing to explain or understand or prove anything. That night, Attadatta couldn't sleep. His mind kept returning to a disturbing question. I know all the words, but do I know the truth? He could recite the discourse on letting go perfectly, could explain what attachment meant, how it functioned, why it caused suffering, what practices dissolved it. But was he actually letting go? Or was he just carrying increasingly sophisticated concepts about letting go? He could explain emptiness with precision, how phenomena lack inherent existence, how what appears solid is actually empty of independent self-nature, how realizing this brings liberation. Beautiful explanations, logically consistent, textually supported. But did he see emptiness directly, the way the forest monk seemed to see it, without needing the explanation? The more he questioned, the more uncomfortable he became. His entire identity was built on his knowledge. He was the scholar, the expert, the one who understood the teachings better than anyone else in the region. Students came to him precisely because of this knowledge. But what if knowledge wasn't the same as realization? What if understanding the map wasn't the same as making the journey? The realization hit him with the force of physical impact. He'd been carrying knowledge instead of practicing it. Like someone who'd memorized every book about swimming, but never gotten in the water. Like someone who'd studied every cuisine but never tasted actual food. Like someone who'd learned the names of every star but never looked up at the night sky. His concepts about liberation had become a substitute for liberation itself. He'd been so busy mastering the teachings that he'd never fully entered what they were teaching. The words were supposed to point beyond themselves, but he'd stopped at the words, polishing them, arranging them, defending them, explaining them. The map had become more important than the territory. The next morning, Attadatta approached the forest monk with unusual humility. "Would you teach me?" he asked. The monk looked surprised. "What could I teach you? You know the entire canon. I barely know anything." "Exactly," Attadatta said. "Teach me how to not know." So they began a different kind of practice. Attadatta stopped trying to prove his knowledge and started investigating his direct experience. When they sat together in meditation, the forest monk would occasionally ask simple questions. "What do you notice right now?" Attadatta's habit was to answer conceptually, "I notice the arising and passing of phenomena, the impermanent nature of all conditioned things." The monk would gently interrupt, "No, what do you actually notice? Not what the teachings say you should notice. What's actually here?" This was harder than anything Attadatta had ever done. His mind wanted to jump immediately to concepts, to explanations, to the proper Buddhist vocabulary for describing experience. The forest monk kept pulling him back. Before the word breath, what's actually here? Before the concept body? What do you feel? Weeks passed like this. Slowly, painfully, Attadatta began to discover something beneath all his knowledge. Not, I understand emptiness, as a concept he could explain. Just the simple, direct experience of no self, right here, in this moment. Not an idea about it, not a theory about it, just the actual seeing of it. Not, I comprehend dependent origination as a chain he could recite. Just noticing how this leads to that. This feeling gives rise to that thought conditions this action, all of it flowing naturally without anyone conducting it. Not, I know what the Buddha taught about suffering as information stored in memory. Just the direct recognition of how grasping creates tension, how releasing brings ease, felt immediately in his own body and mind. The difference was subtle but total, like the difference between reading a recipe and tasting food. Both valid, both useful, but one is direct and one is abstract. He'd been living in the abstract for so long, he'd forgotten the direct was even possible. Months into this new practice, a student came to ask him a question about a complex teaching. Attadatta opened his mouth to give his usual scholarly explanation and stopped. I could explain the teaching to you, he said slowly, but the truth isn't in the explanation I would give. It's in the direct seeing the teaching points toward. Would you like to practice seeing it together? The student looked confused. But isn't understanding the teaching important? Understanding is useful, Attadatta said. Like knowing the directions to a place is useful. But having the directions isn't the same as arriving there. I spent years collecting better and better directions, more and more detailed maps. Never occurred to me to actually make the journey. This final teaching is the hardest because it includes itself. Don't be attached to views. Is itself a view? Release your concepts. Is itself a concept? Even this teaching about releasing teachings becomes something you could grasp and carry and defend. But it points to something beyond views altogether. Direct experience. Not ideas about reality, but reality itself, unfiltered by conceptual overlay. The modern parallel is reading about happiness versus being happy. You can study the psychology of joy, understand the neuroscience of well-being, master the philosophy of contentment. All valuable knowledge. Or you can just be happy when happiness arises, without needing to analyze it, categorize it, or compare it to descriptions in books. You've now encountered 7 teachings about letting go. Release toxic environment. Untangle harmful patterns. Transform anger into patience. See through compensation methods. Release egocentrism through compassion. Quiet the discursive mind through meditation. Release rigid views through wisdom. Beautiful teachings, potentially useful teachings, and also don't carry them as new burdens. Not, I must let go correctly according to these 7 steps. Not, I have to implement all 7 teachings perfectly, or I've failed. Not, these are the only valid approaches to freedom. Just, opportunity to release, if it feels right. Test each teaching in your own experience. Does it actually lighten your burden, or just give you a more sophisticated burden to carry? Does it create more space in your life, or fill that space with new obligations? Does it bring you closer to direct experience, or give you better concepts to think about? These teachings aren't rules to follow. They're invitations to experiment. Try releasing your toxic environment and see what changes. Try noting your thoughts without believing them and notice what shifts. Try viewing your suffering as universal rather than personal and feel whether that brings relief. If a teaching helps, use it. If it doesn't, set it aside. The teachings serve you. You don't serve the teachings. And remember, the goal isn't to master 7 teachings about letting go. The goal is to actually let go. You've sat with this entire journey, 7 burdens named and examined, environment, patterns, anger, compensation, ego, mental noise, rigid views. This isn't a checklist to perfect, not a program to complete, or a test to pass. Just a map of territory you might recognize in your own life. Some of these burdens might feel urgent to release right now. You recognize yourself in the story of Sigala, drowning in toxic friendships, or Latukika trapped in egocentrism, or Muga fighting his own thoughts. Start there, one burden at a time. Other teachings might not resonate yet, and that's fine. You're not failing if anger feels like the burden you need to address, but mental noise doesn't bother you much. Work with what's actually heavy, not what you think should be heavy, according to some ideal progression. This isn't a race toward enlightenment. It's not about becoming someone different or achieving some special state. It's about returning home to what was always here, beneath the burdens. And home is here, right now, under the stones you've been carrying. It never left. You just forgot it was there because your hands were so full. Notice what feels lighter having heard these teachings, even if it's subtle. Even if it's just one small recognition that you don't have to keep carrying something that never belonged to you. Maybe you saw yourself in the pattern of compensation, reaching for distraction every time discomfort appears. And now you notice the urge arising and pause for just 10 seconds before acting on it. That's movement. Maybe you recognize the egocentrism, making every neutral event about you personally. And now when the rain ruins your plans, you catch yourself before spinning the story about how the universe is against you. That's progress. Maybe you've been fighting your thoughts like Muga fought his, and now you understand you can just watch them pass like leaves on a stream. That's transformation. Even subtle shifts matter. You don't need dramatic awakening or complete liberation to benefit from releasing one stone. Your arms get lighter immediately. The path continues as long as you're alive. These 7 teachings aren't the end. They're one way of beginning. You'll return to them again and again, seeing deeper layers each time, releasing more subtle versions of the same burdens. But it doesn't have to be so heavy. Not anymore. Not if you're willing to put something down. You can release your grip on the toxic environment that depletes you. You can untangle from the harmful pattern you've been repeating for years. You can stop feeding the anger that burns you more than anyone else. You can notice the compensation method that never actually satisfies. You can see beyond the ego that makes everything about protecting and defending yourself. You can observe the thoughts without being controlled by everyone that appears. You can hold the teachings lightly instead of clutching them like weapons or shields. You can put something down right now if you want. Notice what you're holding that you don't need to hold anymore. And just for this moment, let it rest. See what remains when your hands are finally empty.